So this is a presentation that that I put together this summer. I have had my own civic awakening probably in the last 4 years in just from a citizen standpoint, finding ways to take action on the state and local level, and also learning how much impact you can have at the state and local level. And so it's become my soapbox issue, but I think it's so relevant to the work that we are doing for racial and social justice and anti-racism. And so I'm going to talk through just a little kind of 101 on civics and how to get engaged. And there's some action items in here. And many of you might have seen this the first time around, but even as I was going back through, I think it's a good time because a lot of states are in session right now. So there's actually actions you can take at this very moment. And B, it's just a good refresher because I think we had a lot of sense of urgency at the beginning, and I want to make sure we don't lose that. So I rooted this, I love this illustration because when we're talking about racial and social justice, really the government aspect is just one of the many spheres. So there's so many things that we need to do. And I think when we were beginning our conversations, we've gone in a lot of these different directions. But from a government standpoint, this is where, contacting our representatives, voting and petitioning for changes, and electing community-driven local officials, I think, is really the core aspect of what we can do to for racial and social justice. But just one of many. The other key thing that as just kind of a positioning point is that you don't have to be a political person or be into politics to care about these issues. Really, that's just being complacent. So I think, everybody as a citizen has a responsibility to be engaged in their local and state governments. That's my belief. And again, a cute illustration, but I think just a very serious topic that it's not, that politics isn't an interest, it's just a part of being a citizen. So why does local and state government matter? States are more productive. And when I say state and local, it's really in comparison to federal, which your federal is the president and your senators and your House members, everything at the federal level. This is your local government, so your governors and your local representatives. So that's the comparison. The federal gets so much attention, and yes, there's a lot of power at the federal level, but there's so much more policy that actually impacts your daily life that's enacted at the state and local level. So they're more productive. They introduce way more bills. Legislation is way more likely to be actually enacted than legislation that's introduced at the federal level. And as I mentioned, most of the things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis are governed at this level. So your education, transportation, healthcare, police and fire departments, a big thing for this year, housing, the legal system, voting rights, gun laws, you name it. So it's really the most important things. And the best part is that you actually can have more of an impact because these are people that live in your neighborhood or your community, and they represent a smaller group of people. So you have a lot more visibility as a citizen and access to the decision makers at the state and local level. Another cute graphic that I think people have this vision of the decision makers being somewhere above or beyond that we don't have access to. And I think part of what my soapboxes and my goal is just to help kind of break down, like, this isn't how it should be. And in fact, the way activism has worked in this country really isn't. So instead of thinking of the decision makers as kind of up in this castle, like a table that you'll never sit at, think of yourselves as somebody who is at that table and run for office. I think that's another key message. Or if you don't want to run for office, make your voice heard in other ways. And that's what we'll talk about. I'm not checking the chat. necessarily. So if there's any questions, just feel free to chime in.
I'm monitoring the chat for us.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So representation basics, this is again your Civics 101, but just to bring it down to the basics, we have at the state level, you have your 3 branches of government: executive, which is your governor, lieutenant governor, typically attorney general. You have your legislative, which is your typically 2 bodies. Most states, I think some states actually just have 1, but most states have the 2 bodies, the upper house and the lower, the Senate and the House. Senate usually have 4 years, House typically 2. Again, every state's a little bit different. The legislative, they're actually the body that enacts laws, manage and approve the budget, they do confirmations, and really they are representative of your needs. The session time varies by state. We'll talk about that. Virginia, which is where I live, is in session right now, and it's like hot and heavy for like a month and a half, and then it's over. Some are longer than that, but it just, your opportunity for action is like really slim in that window. So that's why I've been a little bit busy the last month trying to do as much as I can. And then you have your judiciary, which is the state Supreme Court. So that's kind of your state representation. Then you also have your local, and this is where there's a ton of variation depending on if you live, like I'm in a county and that's my form of local government, but if it's a city, you might have a city council, mayor. So one of the key action items which we'll get to next is to identify your state government and who represents you at each of these levels. You likely probably know who represents you at the executive level. And you might know your state legislatures, but even local, like I forget sometimes, you know, who is my representative on my board of supervisors for my specific area in my county, and who's on the school board. And there's so many people, and they change. So it's always good to refresh and make sure that you know who represents you. And so this is our action item 1. If you didn't do it before, it might be a good idea to either double check after, you know, we did have elections, so there might have been some changes, or fill it out for the first time. So how legislation is passed, again, this is kind of very rudimentary overview, but every law basically starts with some sort of idea. That idea can come from some sort of group, like a lot of activist groups will actually draft legislation or bring about ideas. Sometimes it comes from individuals. I'll give you an example. A law that was just passed in the Virginia legislature is the getting rid of the panic defense. So when Matthew Shepard was murdered, there's a panic defense that people can use because they say that, oh, that the person was gay and that's why I murdered them, and they could use that defense in court, which is horrendous. A teenager came to a state legislature and legislator and asked if we could get that law banned in Virginia, and that legislator brought it all the way to the General Assembly. So literally a teenager came to legislate. It really could come from anybody. The legislator will draft the bill proposal. It will be assigned a number in a committee. That legislator will then request a public hearing for the bill in a committee. And there's all sorts of types of committees, and the committees are made up of all legislators. The committee, which is usually like 12 to 14 people, will vote on the bill. If it passes in the committee, then it will go to the full chamber. So this is happening frequently, concurrently in both chambers. So it's happening in the Senate and the House at the same time. And so they go from committee, then to the full chamber. If it passes, then at least in Virginia, it's called crossover day, and basically they swap bills. And so they go through the same process over again on the other chamber. If the bills are the same and they pass both chambers, then they'll go on to the governor to sign. If they're not the same, then they'll go to conference committee and try to like work out any differences to see if they can come to an arrangement. So I'll give you another example on that. There's a marijuana legalization bill going through Virginia right now. And it went through both committees, but in conference committee, the two bills are different in just one way. One would legalize marijuana starting July 1 of this year, and one would only legalize once the dispensary is allowed to open in like 2024. So a big difference, but so now they're coming together to try to figure out which one it's going to go, and then they'll send the bill to the governor. If it's signed, then it becomes law. Again, timing is everything. So another key thing to look at and a good action item is to understand when your legislature is in session. As I said, some of them are very short, some of them are longer. And then from a city and local government perspective, look at when your municipalities welcome public input. I know, for instance, in my county, there's specific time periods where they want input on initiatives or more generally. And so you don't want to miss that window. So, one of the things that I do is just sign up for every email newsletter I can from my representatives, but also from the county, so that I make sure that if there's some sort of public input window for anything, that I'm aware and I can weigh in. A recent example actually related to policing is the Fairfax County Police did a public survey on what they, kind of in the spirit of reimagining police, not exactly to that extent, but what the community expects out of a police department. So they did put that survey out there, and so I wanted to make sure that I could weigh in on that. And then on your local level, again, it does vary so much, but usually there's councils and board of supervisors that will establish some policies. The state really defines what's determined at that local level, so that's why there's so much variation. But they'll approve budget, they'll set tax rates. There's a lot on the education side that's on your local level. And again, most of that input is from public meetings, calls for feedback, town halls, etc. So I put this in here because again, as I was thinking back, and there was so much energy and rage this summer, and I still feel that, and I hope that we can keep that flame burning. But I do want to the other white people on the call, and then even in the recording as we share this, that really we do have a lot of the onus, I do believe, falls on us. And again, I believe it's a duty as a citizen to stay active in your local, but I think from a racial and social justice perspective, it's kind of making sure that you're putting on you of how are you specifically, what are you going to do to change the legacy of violence in this country? So it's a big ask, and there's so many things that we need to do. But one of the other key action items that I think is necessary is to pick your battles. You can't boil the ocean. And I think if everybody kind of picked the one key thing that they are most passionate about solving, you can have so much impact in just that one area. What I like to do is look at what other national or regional advocacy organizations are doing and subscribe. So this is a lot of the police reform and criminal justice. And for police reform, 8 Can't Wait, or the Campaign Zero there was actually a way that you could compare your county and city and how it stacks up to some of those reforms. Same with the Equal Justice Initiative with criminal justice and figuring out what your district attorney is doing about, say, wrongful convictions. I joined the Fairfax County NAACP this summer, and they've been great because not only are there good discussions about some of the policy demands, but they also will send out action alerts. So right now, when the legislature is in session, I get a text alert that says, so-and-so bill needs to pass through this committee, contact your rep and make sure that they're gonna vote for it or lobby for them. So I highly recommend that. I actually do that for a few other of my interests. So for the NARAL and secular Democrats, I get similar alerts, and it's just a really good way to keep up, because it's really hard to keep up with everything that's going through the legislature. So pick your battles and find the things that you're most passionate about, and use that to then educate yourself, but also find those little places where you can take action. Oop. And again, this is I love this quote. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. So again, picking our battles, finding those things where we can have impact. And you'll see that the change does multiply as more and more people do that. I'll give another example again, because we're in the middle of our session. In Virginia, this is related to NARAL pro-choice, but they have, there was a bill a couple of years ago that was related to expanding birth control access so that you could get more than a pack per month, which I always thought was ridiculous. You could only get one pack of birth control per month. Like, why are you like keeping it from people? And this was when the Democrats did not have control of the legislature. So there were like the Republicans didn't want to pass any expansion of any contraception. But that bill I lobbied for, I called all of the people on the committee, including Republicans. They didn't really want to hear from me. And they did expand that access to 3 months, which is like baby steps. Okay, we'll get there. But then finally, when the Democrats took control, they've been building upon that progress. So even if you're in a state that it's like hard to see progress, sometimes those small things, the small wins will actually build towards bigger wins down the road. So action item number 3 is really make contact, attend town halls or public forums. This is so easy now because of COVID. It's actually, I hope that it continues this way, and because you're able to attend town hall instead of having to go down to the library or some congregation with a bunch of people. Everything's on Zoom now, so you can attend. Again, sign up to receive those email updates from your reps. A good representative, especially if they're during session, should be sending you regular updates about what bills that they have up, what they've gotten passed, and also any open forums that they have for feedback. If they're not doing that, then you should be demanding more out of your representatives for sure. Write or email your representatives about your concerns. Make sure that they know you. I think I told this story before, but the last time I went to Richmond in January, I went into the office of one of my reps and they're like, "Oh, you emailed about so-and-so last year." And yes, I did email them about that, but I think they do remember. And especially if you have a really compelling story, or are very consistent in the types of things that you bring forward to them, they do, most people genuinely want to listen and engage with you and be a good representative. I think be specific, say what you want. Always mention a specific policy or bill if possible. Be kind but firm. Try to hold them accountable for action and follow up. And again, when are they up for re-election? I think that's the key thing to note, because that will drive their decision making, but it also could drive your decision making in terms of who you might want to vote for the next time around. Meet on the phone or in person. This is kind of when we were always on the phone, but it is nice when you do there's a lot of organizations that will do lobby days where you can actually go to your state capitol and go like meet with a bunch of representatives. So if you have the opportunity to do that, I would totally recommend it. It's great. But in the virtual world, I think there's a lot of still opportunities to connect with your representative. And then submit or speak out with public testimony. I did this recently for NARAL. It's really easy, especially if you get involved. They request like, hey, if you have a story about this, or if you feel strongly about this and you want to submit some remarks, and state why you have that position, why it's important to you, it can get submitted into the public record. So always easy ways to make contact with your representatives. And then the but. Unfortunately, our representation is not really representative of this country, both from a gender perspective and race. This is changing quite a bit, which I'm so happy to see, but it's still not truly representative or equal. So I think when you think about your representation, my representation is all white men. And I live in a very progressive area, and they're all very progressive people, but it's still, they're all white men. And I would love to see that change. So I think we still have a lot of work to do to get more diversity in office. Unfortunately, a lot of races still go uncontested. In the November 2018 midterms, more than half of all races were uncontested. 68% at the county level, like that is so depressing, and 26% at the state level. And half of those running without opposition were white men. So there are races where somebody could be running against the opposition and in uncontested races. And the other thing is uncontested candidates are going to be less productive. They're not being challenged in any way. So I think that just makes, they're not going to be better representatives for their citizens. There are many organizations that are changing this. I love Run for Something is one of my favorite. Emily's List is, of course, more on the women's side. She should run again, women. So I think it's great if there's another action item is to support these types of organizations, because, sorry, my battery is giving me warning signals, even though I'm plugged in. This is another way that you can support those types of candidates. By the way, Emily's List stands for Early Money is Like Yeast. It raises the dough. And so the whole point of that is to make sure that these candidates have money to actually have a head start.
Jess, we have a question for you. So question is, do uncontested races get put on the ballot? I've never seen one on mine. Did we lose Jess?
Looks like she's frozen.
Yeah.
She may be frozen for a second.
Yeah, I don't think her computer was kidding. She may think her computer was plugged. She thinks her computer was.
Okay, I might have to stop recording now. I have to give permissions to share on Zoom on this new. Okay, so a little blip there, but I think ending here, I'm not sure where I cut off, but I just wanted to share that one way that you can definitely support a more diverse representation is by supporting these organizations that really help them run. And I shared my favorite tidbit that Emily's List stands for Early Money is Like Yeast. It raises the dough, so make sure that you support those candidates very early on in their career. Can really be a game changer. So this comes down to voting, and we're just past a huge election with a major get out the vote initiative. And that typically does happen with federal elections, especially such high profile ones, but there's more elections that happen throughout the year, including primaries and sometimes city and local elections that aren't happening in your typical November timeframe. This graphic is kind of silly, but I think, from a voting perspective, a lot of people really feel like it won't make a difference either way. But just from a very rudimentary perspective, if everybody feels that way, just think of together what the impact that they could have. And again, I think from a state and local, there, sometimes the difference between some of these elections, win or lose, is just a couple hundred votes. So from a federal perspective, yes, it does seem like, millions and millions of votes and you're just one of them, but state and local is like where your vote really can make a difference and really matter. Unfortunately, the US does have among the lowest voter turnout of all developed nations. People of color are disproportionately affected by voter suppression tactics. This is happening right now in Georgia. So something to add to your existing battles list is how to combat voter suppression, especially after November election. The Republicans are using what they perceive to be non-existent voter fraud to crack down on a lot of the laws that make it easier for people to vote. There are many elections. The majority of the more than 500,000 elected officials are not voted on in November. So there's a website there you can find, you can look at the Fair Election Center. So in Virginia, we do have elections in June and November. So, just be aware of what's happening in your community. Don't like your choices. A new thing that's gaining more popularity is ranked choice voting, and you can advocate for that. And this is where you can kind of pick your top choices in a ranked order, so that it's not just a one or the other option. You can volunteer to help mobilize Black voters. There's many organizations that are doing this now. Again, this was relevant to November, but will continue to be relevant, that COVID does threaten to reduce voter turnout, especially in the states that are going to crack down on early voting or no excuse vote by mail. So I feel like this is something we're going to have to keep watch on, especially if there's any elections coming up before, even in June, we have primaries here in Virginia, and that we're still going to be in a similar situation as we are now. So look at your community and, figure out ways that you can continue to help get out the vote. I think we're in a continuing situation of threat from voter suppression tactics, threat from COVID influencing vote. And also, this is an add-on, I think people losing steam after 2020, when the federal elections are in your face every single day for that long, people get tired of it. So I think just energizing people around getting out the vote and how important it is on the state and local level, I think is really, really important. And then finally, research candidates that inspire you who are running for office in upcoming elections and support their campaign, especially if your current reps are just really not getting it done. So I'll share with you somebody who really inspires me, which is Jennifer Carroll Floyd. She was a public defender, decided to run for office in 2016 at the age of 36. I am 37, so I feel way underaccomplished. She found out she was pregnant with twins 3 weeks after launching her campaign. She continued to knock on doors with her husband, driving her around. She was supported by Run for Something, which was the organization I mentioned earlier. And she won the primary by 14 votes. So again, just the scale of local elections, so really the votes have so much impact in each individual vote. She went into labor only a few weeks after the primary. Her babies were born at 1.5 pounds each and spent months in the NICU. She still went on to win in November by 26 points and was easily reelected in 2019. She has had enormous impact in the state of Virginia. We've had a huge shift this state in the last few years since the Democratic majority took over. She helped expand Medicare. She introduced criminal justice. She led the charge to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. And she is now running for governor of Virginia, we have our election this year. And she could be the first Black woman governor in the history of the United States. We have two Black women running for office in Virginia, or for governor, which is also amazingly exciting. So there are people like this all across the country, and Run for Something is a good way to discover them. Another candidate that I discovered through Run for Something is Malcolm Kenyatta. He is in Pennsylvania, and I think just announced that he's running for Senate in Pennsylvania. And he was somebody who younger, decided to run and was in the state legislature in Pennsylvania and now is running for a statewide campaign. So there's amazing people out there, and you'll find them if you kind of go out and look at those organizations that are supporting them. And I'll end with my favorite Obama quote. I'm reading his book right now, but this was from his speech, his final speech as president. And I just like speaking about citizenship in this way, but basically it falls on each of us to be those anxious, jealous guardians of our democracy, embrace the joyous task we have been given to continually try to improve this great nation of ours, because for all of our outward differences, we in fact all share the same proud type, the most important office in our democracy, a citizen. And we have this deck. There's some other few resources. I'm sure we've shared this otherwise, but I will leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Jess, for this wonderful presentation.